Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another biology class. Today we're going to be looking at section 1 of this last module, looking at biodiversity, which I think will be a great topic. So let's get into it. Today's focus question is, why is biodiversity important? And it's a pretty good question, especially since you may have not have actually thought about or considered, that's not even a word, might not have ever thought about biodiversity or considered why it's important. So we're going to look into that. And I've got a picture here that shows what's called monocropping, because it is the exact inverse of biodiversity. And part of an important discussion that you should think about and maybe take part in as you grow older, because humans and the environment don't always have the same end goals. So we'll get into that later, but here's today's vocabulary. The first vocabulary is extinction, biodiversity, genetic diversity, species diversity, and ecosystem diversity. Good stuff. The review vocabulary might not actually be review for you. Depends on whether or not you had a life science class in middle school. And the term is a gene. And what a gene is, historically speaking, is a piece of DNA that codes for a protein. That's now been shown to be a very oversimplistic definition. And so a gene is a piece of DNA that has some kind of functional expression in your body's program. Right, so it's a little sub-program in your DNA that runs, that does something important, and usually is connected to some kind of trait or visible expression within your body. Though a lot of genes can do things that you don't actually see on the surface level, like creating muscle fibers. There's a lot of genes involved in making muscle fibers, and you don't actually see them necessarily, but if they don't all work, then all of a sudden you notice them pretty clearly, because there's clearly something wrong with your muscles. So genes are little programs in your genome, which is all of your programs in your DNA, that does something for you as an organism, or does something for an organism. And that feeds right into the topic of genetic diversity. And so we've talked about populations so far. And in every population, each individual has their own genes, and all of the genes in all of the population added together is equal to the genetic diversity of that population. And it turns out that if the genetic diversity of a population gets too low, meaning that you have what's called a genetic bottleneck, or enough organisms die off, it shrinks down, that species will eventually die off or go extinct, okay? And so genetic diversity is really important in a population. And again, if it goes below a certain threshold, then the program can't adapt and the species invariably dies. Now, species diversity is kind of the sum of genetic diversity and the expression of genetics in a population. So it's all the members of that species in all of the populations of that species, all added together, and that's species diversity. And so if you look at the North American squirrel, for example, that includes the dark black squirrels of the Northeast, the light brown squirrels, the squirrels with the white tails, that would all be considered species diversity of a squirrel. And then finally, the highest level of diversity would be ecosystem diversity. And so you'll remember that an ecosystem is all of the populations and all of the organisms living kind of in the same place, around the same time, in the same region. And you want to have a lot of different types of organisms, it turns out, in an ecosystem, because that way, if something causes a disturbance in the ecosystem can recover. And if there is not a large degree of species diversity, what's called a keystone species might die off, and then a whole bunch of other species die off as a result. And so maybe there's a specific type of plant And when it dies, the insects that used to feed off of it and pollinate it, well, they then die off. And then the birds that eat those insects die off. And it starts this kind of chain reaction that leads to a very damaged ecosystem. And so ecosystem diversity can be very, very important. Now, when we're looking at ecosystems, something called the direct economic value is something that we need to consider. And direct economic value includes things like being able to harvest trees as a natural resource for lumber, to build things, to start fires, and to have in our, for cooking things. There's definitely a direct economic value to a really good smoked beef or smoked ham, which you will only get by having certain types of wood in your smoker. And so that's an example of direct economic value. Maple syrup would be another great example of direct economic value from a certain species within a forest. But this can also include things like medicines that we haven't discovered yet that maybe exist in rare plants in the Amazon rainforest, for example, right? A lot of times the direct economic value can be a bit hidden because we don't know everything. Now, indirect economic value is much harder to quantify, and these are the ways that ecosystems help provide value to humans that aren't just directly from harvesting resources. Like if you have green plants on rooftops in a city, it decreases what's called the heat island effect and can lower the temperature of the city during the hot summer months. It also produces oxygen and takes in carbon dioxide. A lot of the root systems of coastal plants or river coast plants can help purify the water, right? There's a lot of bacteria in water systems that can help purify water as wastewater comes out of a city and goes into the nature around a city or a town. And that's indirect economic value. It's still very valuable. It still serves humans in a very valuable way, but it's not something that humans are directly extracting from nature itself. There's also aesthetic and scientific value to be considered. I kind of already hinted at the scientific value, where we are still discovering that plants produce unique chemicals, and different species of plants produce different varieties of chemicals that could be very useful for medications, for drugs, maybe for our general health. There could be some plant that taken as a tea or eaten as an herbal supplement might actually prolong human health because of some enzymes or antioxidants that it contains. There's a lot of possibilities in terms of the untapped potential of plants and animal species for science to discover. That's one of the great things about science, is that it's constantly attempting to discover and learn more about the natural world. And when we do that, we happen to stumble upon things that help us. Maybe we'll find the next new variant of antibiotic that will save us from the antibiotic resistant bacteria that are slowly beginning to emerge. There's all kinds of wonderful things to be discovered in nature, and there's still places on Earth that have yet to be explored, especially the bottoms of the oceans. Though some places in very tropical rainforests are really hard to get to, and they could be explored as well. And then, of course, aesthetics. Nature is beautiful. One of the best arguments, I would say, for the idea that nature was created by an intelligent mind is how excessively beautiful nature is, for no reason other than it seems to be beautiful. You look into the heavens, it's beautiful. There's just beauty there to be discovered. There are plants that are just beautiful, and it's beautiful beyond their ability to attract insects. They're just stunning to look at because of the patterns and the uniqueness. And I think excessive beauty in existence points very strongly to a beautiful mind behind existence. So again, you can totally disagree with me if you like, but I find aesthetics in nature to be something that is awe-inspiring to me. And even if I weren't a theistic person, didn't believe in any kind of intelligence behind it, I would still find a tremendous sense of value in the aesthetics of nature. And so, hopefully, at least at that much, we can agree on that there are aspects of the natural world, plants, animals, they're beautiful. They're adorable. They're cute little creatures like honey gliders that they make you smile when you look at them because they are just so unbelievably cute and precious. And I think that is a tremendously valuable thing in the biodiversity of the planet. So, back to this first question, why is biodiversity important? Well, hopefully, I've given you some good things to think about. Hopefully, you can think of at least one reason that biodiversity is important at this point. And I thank you very much for listening.